Prefabrication can be in a range from components of a building that are made off-site and brought onto site, and most houses in New Zealand now have some component of prefabrication. I'm thinking of roof framing trusses, pre-framed timber walls, bathrooms and kitchens, obviously. So a lot of components that go into a house are already made off-site. So prefabrication isn't a completely new idea.
When I think of prefabrication, I'm really, for me, thinking of anything where a construction technique where you literally pre-cut, pre-assemble, pre-monitor everything. It doesn't, for me, necessarily mean that the object is necessarily a pre-assembled object, which is then put on for example, on a truck or what have you, and transported somewhere. But the component parts are all prefabricated.
Prefabrication has always been a way of making cheap, efficient housing, and I suppose it's perfect for that. But then it gets a reputation for being a sort of cookie-cutter architecture.
That's why I don't like the word prefabrication. That's why I like the word modern methods of construction. It's the way we have to build now. It's the way to get things done quickly. It's efficient. It's sustainable. You know, it's just straightforward. I've watched a house being erected in 1 week in Europe, and once you've seen that done, there's no going back, you know.
Well, I'd use the term pre-built rather than prefabrication. I know in classrooms people have all been through prefabs, but most of those were built as transportables, whereas prefab after the war were built in sections and bolted and nailed together on site in the schools. So we're actually transportable rather than prefab.
The concept of prefabrication is to have increased quality, increase in speed of building, and for it to be more of a sustainable way of building and to be better for the labour force as well.
Prefab today is about quality. Prefab is a controlled process, and so you've got architects designing prefab homes and buildings because it's fun to do and you can get some great outcomes, and we can be more sure of our quality at the end of the day, and that's what's important to us.
Prefab is smarter building. It's a 22nd century building. It's the next generation of the building industry, and it makes connections between parts that have historically been separate. Kind of reconnects, actually, design, construction, manufacturing in a big collaborative happy family in some ways.
If you build something off-site, you have control. You can work all day through all weathers. If you want to, you can double shift to get it done in time. And you can control the whole process. So you have everything you need to put the house together in the factory before you start. You don't have somebody arriving on site and thinking, oh, I have to go down to Placemakers and get another piece of some building material that I don't have to finish this job.
The resources are better utilised. If you've got a need for an electrician for half a day, he's local, he's right there, he isn't spending half a day to travel to do a half a day's work. Wastage of material is lower, materials left over when one job can be easily used on the next job. Damage, working conditions are better, no mud and slush. A level site, or if it's inside a building, it's out of the weather.
Well, you've got less disruption on your site, and so we can speed up the whole process. It's standardised, so we know what's going in there, we know the materials, we know the whole budget to the last cent. So you've got sureties in that respect.
Well, the advantage of working in a factory environment is that you've got everybody together for a start, and in all kinds of weather environments and that sort of thing. But it also it improves or helps our communication. We are able to work with the guys on the quality aspect. We're able to train. There's many advantages of having them here under one roof, personally.
I think if we start to think about modern uses of prefabrication and Māori housing solutions, the key advantage is cost and being able to prefabricate in perhaps an urban location and then truck to a more remote location where you've got less access to services, less access to professionals as well, like plumbers and drain layers and carpenters.
It's actually higher quality building like this. In New Zealand, it's so wet, particularly in Auckland, and we just can't afford to have sticks hanging out on site for months on end. It's bound to create problems in the future with expansion and contraction and things. And the need for prefabrication has come out of the depths of winter in Europe and things like that. And we've been lucky here. We haven't got those kinds of climatic conditions that have led to that.
If you look at some of the best examples through, for example, Japan or in Germany, probably the best insulated, the best constructed houses quite often come off production lines of one form or another.
There definitely needs to be a consumer shift, and people need to see off-site construction as a positive, as a sustainable option, a hugely high-quality option. It's better for everybody.
Mass customisation is the reality of the 21st century and into the 22nd, where prefabrication doesn't mean the same. Very easily, changes can be made through computer programs, and then there will be outputs that match those changes. Outputs, sorry, that's a jargon term, but then the building that comes out the other end will be different as people are, as different as the smile on people's faces.
The odds of being able to go for a walkthrough through a building that's virtual on a computer, pick out your surfaces, your materials, even some of the forms, some of the window sizes, the way you dress the room, the type of appliances you have in a kitchen, the type of appliances you have in a bathroom. You could pick all of that, you could change all of that with a mass customisable platform. You could change it all for almost no extra cost. So the potential to do it is greater now than it's ever been. And maybe that's another reason why prefab is almost about to have its time.
My father started off shifting second-hand buildings and upset people by shifting an old dunga into next door to them. And his mother challenged him as to why he couldn't make a living by pleasing people instead of upsetting people. So then he thought about it, and that's how he got into new houses. He thought, well, I'll shift new houses there instead of old ones.
In the early days, my grandfather decided that doing transportable homes, new homes, was the way of the future. And every person he talked to told him he was nuts. And he decided that the more people that thought it was a stupid idea must mean it was a good idea.
Well, in those days, materials were short. There's a shortage of manpower, a shortage of materials, and he just looked for a way to build things more efficiently. He wasn't an academic, he was a hands-on, practical sort of person, and he just thought by building them in the yard and shifting them like he'd been shifting second-hand buildings was the answer.
Back in the early days, it was due to a lot of people not having vehicles, it was very difficult to get labour onto site, especially considering they had to have the tools, and public transport was quite limited. So it made a lot of sense to build in a central location that people could travel easily to, and then construct the whole entire house right down to floor coverings, and then transport to site as a completed unit.
Well, Keith Hay employed all the plumbers, electricians and carpenters in the yard all in one spot. It was all planned, the production. There was different teams. You had a team for every stage of a house. And being an apprentice, you'd spend 2 or 3 months on one team doing foundations in the yard, and then framing and inside finishing, outside finishing, all of that sort of stuff. Every little piece of timber was milled from rough sawn to the finished product. Windows were all made, all the profiles of the joinery were all done in the joiner shop. So everything was made in one spot and assembled across the road. And there was no travelling. When the houses went to the site, basically all you had to do was put the pipes from under the house to the drain and put the power feed on. Some of them were pretty big. We had the old Forsyth there, I remember that one. It was a big one in the Rangatiki. The name's
22 metres long.
Yeah, and I remember the one up the top there, the cobble, yeah, it's the gables up on the top there.
That was the one that had the folding roof?
That's right, yeah. Yeah, it was a hard job for the poor old house movers lifting those up, but we got them up there.
My understanding back in the early days, it was a big occasion, a house going through, and would attract a lot of kids and neighbours would come out and follow the house up the street.
It was never ever seen before. People used to see these things going through shopping centres at 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, because back in the early 60s you could shift hours at 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. And it was an awesome sort of looking sight. The big American trucks that they had, and the trailers. Most of the trailers were built by Keith Hay himself in their workshops just behind us here today. And yeah, it was something impressive.
From the back, I'd say that's old normal.
So pressing the doors in the factory.
Yeah, yeah.
The old joiner shop.
Yeah, remember those.
Do you remember the school? What school was this to, Glenn?
Drury. It was built in the Drury yard, and we
Towed by the Clydesdale horses.
took the horses up there.
That was built in a weekend with all the community help.
Was, yeah.
For the school?
Was, yeah.
Around the country, majority of the housing we construct is still built in the yard and then shipped to site. A lot of our clients are rural or for coastal properties, and getting labour to site is very costly in getting materials there. So it's still a lot more efficient to build in a central location and then transport a completed unit. So Glenn, this is what we've been working on at Christchurch, the Hive, new house that we've done with Andre Hodgkin.
How many of these are you expecting to build there?
Well, we're hoping to build a few hundred of them, Glenn. A few different designs, but they've been designed to suit bigger, more upmarket sites.
Yeah.
This particular one here is over 200 square metres, which is a big home to be prefabricated. A little bit more difficult for you to deliver. They've all been designed around 2 or 3 piece deliveries.
My father came out of war-torn Europe. It wasn't very pleasant in Europe in those days. He decided to immigrate to New Zealand. He was an engineer, trained engineer and architect in Europe, building mainly high-rise buildings, commercial buildings and so on. And he had a tinkering towards making things more quickly in those circumstances. He decided to come to New Zealand, importing houses from Europe. He imported probably about 200 or 300 houses in the early 50s into New Zealand, when there was, in fact, a great shortage of housing and a shortage of people to build these houses. So he imported prefab type panel houses, steel framed, from Europe. However, he could see that was going to come to an end because we have resources here in New Zealand, and he saw particularly Rotorua as a centre where there was a lot of resource available, and he developed the idea using a very old Norwegian log cabin type system to use those materials, and thereby developing the Lockwood system as it is today. My father was a real thinker and inventor, and he developed new ways of putting things together. To the average person, it would not have looked like anything much, but incrementally, the little bits of new ideas developed into a completely new type of system. And that system is still basically used today, with still improvements going on even today.
When you think about what a board looked like in 1950 to what it looks like now in 2012, the addition of the insulation is a major, but in actual fact, the board itself and how it looks hasn't altered that much. What has changed is what the customer wants. So we are now offering them a different type of finish to their home. Externally, you could have many different colours with the aluminium, or you can have cedar and pine. We are leaders at the moment in laminating the exterior of our finish, so you're not just getting a pine board, it's a series of laminated pieces to form your external cladding, making it strong and not giving off the problems that are generally found with other weatherboards.
in the way we operate, we use plantation-grown resources that we have here available in New Zealand, rather than some other types of building that uses a more industrial type process. And from that point of view, we are leaders, I think, in the world regarding using timber and timber type products. And the research in that area, I think we're actually right up front with.
Well, what we got here is our pre-cut plans. We have our ground plan, and we also have our wall plan. We have the material here, and what we do is that once it's been pre-cut to length, as we see here, and there's our numbers on the board, we set the whole wall up on the factory floor, on a table, which represents the wall that we see here. The idea of that is that we make sure that all the cuts, the power holes, the tie rod holes, the window openings, and the length of the boards are in accordance with the plans. You got to say that that's foolproof, and it should be. But it is our way of checking and ensuring that quality control is in place at all times.
The environmental impact of our housing is actually enormously beneficial for the environment, because we actually start off with a resource that stores carbon, and that's unusual for most materials. Most materials take carbon to produce, whereas the timber embodies carbon to start with for its whole life cycle.
Well, the cultural notion underpinning the nano-whare is to take a simple Māori domestic whare and take nano housing, which is a worldwide phenomenon, and actually meld those two typologies and come up with something which fits a simple, cost-effective Māori housing solution, but has some of the modern amenities and systems associated with nano housing. It's responding to the fact that in the last 60, 70 years, New Zealand houses have gone from being an average of 110 square metres to going to around 200 square metres, so nearly doubling in size. And yet family sizes have diminished to maybe 2 to 3, 4 people per household. So smaller families, bigger houses, bigger carbon footprints. So that's where the nano-whare comes in. It says, look, for a lot of our people, they're actually not looking for a large dwelling, and they're not looking to have the upkeep of a big house. I think it's really important that Māori housing solutions are cost-effective, are quality housing solutions, but they also look and feel like they're part of the culture. So they actually need to manifest a Māori sense of place and a Māori architectural presence as well. So inevitably that gable form comes into play, and I think what that gable offers is a lot more air movement. It offers what we call think space, and it also offers a clear connection to our whare nui, which are, as I mentioned, are the strongest aspect of Māori architecture. As we move to an architecture for this country which is more indigenous to this place, I would hope that our architectural solutions will over time become more homogenous, that the best aspects of Māori architecture will actually start to influence all of our housing solutions.
I think where prefabrication is strong is its ability to replicate something in a module, so one after the other, all the same. Now, that need only be an architectural starting point. If you think of the railway towns that were built between the wars, where all the houses are identical, it doesn't actually mean all the people were identical or the lives in them were identical. There's a lot more to a house than the way it's made or its architecture. So, we can apply the way we decorate and the way we shape those houses. Now, if we go back to the state housing suburbs of the 30s and 40s, we tend to think of them as the houses being painted identically and the gardens being identical and everything being the same. I don't think there's really any danger in the contemporary world of all our houses looking the same, because we're really much more interested now in the individualised house than we ever have been before. But you won't achieve all of that in architecture or in prefabrication.
The idea of trying to build a house on site, would be the equivalent of trying to order a car and getting the parts delivered to your driveway and then assembling them. But it's actually worse than that. What you get is a whole bunch of flat sheets of steel you'd have to beat into a shape. And that's why houses are all square boxes, because we have no capacity to change the shape. If they're going to be curved, you have to do it by hand, and that's why most of the curves look pretty bloody terrible when they're handmade. So, we've had this limitation on us for years as designers. You think geometric, you think 2.4, standard sheets, and we've accepted it because we didn't know any different. Well, make it in a factory and you can change the shape of it. You can make something as beautiful as a car, and as detailed if you wanted to. Maybe that's the future of prefab. I think when you start thinking about what you can do, if you start looking at industry and making things inside, as an industrial designer, I'm quite used to, shaping steel. Here I've used laser engraving to put textures into the walls. And in the ceiling, I've actually used vacuum formed panels, which are a bit of a play on the old tin ceilings, which again are all harking back to what you can do in a factory that you can't typically do just on a domestic environment. And I think that leads a little bit into the potential of what prefab could do. If you connect the factory where the house is assembled, with the factory where the panels are made, you can really start opening up some options we don't have at the moment.
This type of software helps create a closer connection between design and construction. And the way that it does this is through computer-aided design and computer-aided manufacture. So you are able to mass customise is the term. So rather than, as in the past, having mass production being lots of things the same, we can mass produce different things every time. And the way this happens is through a closer connection between design and manufacture. So we have digital design, and the digital files are then digitally manufactured, and then the products are assembled, each one slightly different. So it's fantastic. It's a reinvention of craft. What we're seeing here is a digital model of Creature. Creature is the installation that was designed here at VUW for Hokiariki for installation in the Kiwi Prefabrication exhibition. And you'll notice that it's quite a complex, sinuous, muscular kind of curvy design. Quite a difficult design, a builder would say, to make, and an architect would say to draw. The significance really of what we're seeing is actually on the right. We have a graphical algorithm editor. So what that is, in simple language, is it's an interface that allows really complex designs to be made simply and to be changed simply. Now, this is a game changer. What it means is that suddenly we can create designs that are like Creature is, quite simply, quite economically, quite easily. So by its very nature, it's going to, I think, change the nature of design.
What we're using at the moment here is a piece of software called Rhino, which is used by architects, designers, yacht builders, these sorts of things. And this particular piece of software is normally used for developing anything in 3D form digitally. And what is on the side here is the code editor. This allows us to adjust any parameters. So this is anything numerical. So if you start with an item that you might have thought wanted to be 100 millimeters long, it's very easy to quickly change that to 110 should you want to, whereas typically if we've drawn out a typical drawing, we then have to go rework through the drawings, I think, go through plan, section, elevation, all of the drawings and the steps much slower, whereas if we're working in 3 dimensions most of the time and we're using the subtle editors, I think it makes life a lot easier. What we're doing is setting up a logic that we're able to say, in sheets of a certain size, they will need an aperture, so please keep repeating that through all sheets until you reach a sheet that's cut down to a certain size, and at that point on, do not keep boring an aperture through because I don't want this. So rather than Mark needing to go in and draw and map every single one through trigonometry and mathematical drawing or physical drawing techniques, he's able to set the basic logic in 2 instances, which is put a hole in, yes or no, under these parameters, and it should keep running these things out. So in terms of, I guess, a building environment, one could do a similar thing with architecture. So in a series of walls, do we need an aperture, or can we bring in another piece of structure? And the software will actually do a little bit of the thinking for us, which frees up potentially time to do other things, which is spend time on added value rather than simple drawing.
So from here, the digital file will then get sent for manufacture, and it could be sent anywhere in the world. For us, it will be sent downstairs. We have a CNC machine down there. In fact, I'll take you down and show you it in operation. So the file's arrived here, and it then is translated through a specialist software, and then the parts are fabricated automatically. The machine works on several axes, so it will go one way then the other, up and down, and it can create complex shapes. The shapes it's making at the moment are quite simple, but they could be complex, like a landscape, like a topography. Already the XLAM plant down in Nelson has a really large-scale CNC bridge that can fabricate parts as big as you can take on a truck. As big as you can take them on a truck, you can make them on a machine in New Zealand already today.
Like anything, there'll be challenges to make a good prefab house. There's challenges to make a good anything. But I think the advantages, it's just when the advantages are greater than the negatives. So trying to make a decent sized space in a prefab house, yeah, is quite difficult. My first building was a container house, and they're 2.4 metres wide. And after a while, you get pretty sick at 2.4 metres. My second house is made out of an old cool store that, I could make wider, so they're panels. Yeah, so these panels were really the inspiration for the building, and I found these in a demolition yard. I think it's an old kiwi fruit store, not even quite sure what it was. But again, the scale of the panel, they're 1200 wide, but they're 7.2 metres long, which means, you've got a massive panel, really strong, really stiff across themselves, incredible insulation, amazing precision in them. And the way they fit together is just incredible. You just put a little insert in there, that piece fits into the other piece, so they interlock, and all of a sudden you've got a really rigid structure really quickly. For this building, I didn't really want a look that was overly prefabricated or overly metallic, so I've gone and reclad it, and I've used macrocarpa, double glazing. It's quite a different look now, but the qualities of the SIPS panels are still in there. It's strong, it's dry, and it's really well insulated thermally.
We had been looking around for quite some time to find a nice batchy place to put on a spare section, and we had seen a batch to go being built, and we thought that fitted in well with our section. I would describe this batch as airy, lots of light, simple but stylish. We really like to have about prefabricated home was that we didn't have a lot of choice. We had about 2 or 3 choices of, say, the exterior colour, interior colour, lampshades, bathroom units, etc. It was so much easier than having millions of choices. We'd never built before, and you'd hear, we have heard lots of horrible stories of building your own home disasters, but it was easy.
So this is the iPad, which got its name long before Apple borrowed it for their little device. And we chose this place because we thought it was very cool looking and just a fantastic design. And we wanted something that could be put up relatively quickly and without a lot of interaction from us, since it was going to be built while we were in the United States and then came down to take possession of it, and that all worked out like a charm. It was sort of like buying a car. We had just a few choices on the options, you know, the color of the interior and how many modules we wanted. And that was it. And none of the headaches of too many choices and zillions of interactions with builders and architects. We just said, boom, those are the pieces, and they put it together, and here we are. So this may be a small space in some people's view, but when you see the expanse and then you open the doors to get the expanse, it actually feels huge. And I think this is one of the absolute best features about the iPad, is that it's really indoor-outdoor living without ever having to get any UV exposure. You can just open these doors completely. And now I can sit down and have a glass of wine, and basically I'm outside even though I'm inside. I mean, turn around, check out the view.
I think the problem with prefabricated is it's not giving enough advantage, really. The houses aren't that much cheaper, and they're not really that much better. I mean, they're subtly better, but I don't know if they're really better. So what's the big thing going to change in prefab to make people want them and to make most people buy them? Yeah, well, the answer for me is pretty glaringly obvious. It's the same reason you buy an Asian-made TV. You know, high quality, low cost, incredible precision, remarkable technology, well designed. Yeah, but the question is, do we want our houses made there? If they're prefabricated, they could be.
I think there is a danger that you can end up exporting the material, having the technology and the labour exist offshore, and coming back with a flat-packed house that is delivered to you like a piece of kit set furniture. But those are decisions that we make. Does that affect the economy? It all depends where the intellectual property lies. I think, you know, the New Zealand fashion industry is a good example. Everything's made in China, but the intellectual property exists here. New Zealand's very good at exporting ideas, and I think prefabrication is probably around the exploration of those ideas and how it now exists in a global context.
We've got people who we want to employ in New Zealand. We've got good resources in New Zealand to build from, which are made here, and to ship a whole lot of stuff from the other side of the world obviously uses energy and resources. And I suppose it's less resilient. You know, what happens if you want an extra piece of something and you've got to go back to China to get it? There's also the local building codes, and there's knowing the quality of the materials that have been tested in New Zealand under New Zealand conditions. So there are quite a lot of advantages to being able to use New Zealand-made products and New Zealand companies to build them.
The reality of New Zealand is we have a really, really small market. That's one of the biggest challenges actually for prefabrication in New Zealand, is the market size. So there's a certain amount of inevitability in that. And if we're smart, we'll capitalise on our great strengths. The New Zealand timber industry in particular, the added value that's there, there's no reason that New Zealand can't become a hub for prefabrication for the South Pacific in the same way that Germany and Austria are for Europe.
I went to a region in Austria called Vorarlberg and spent some time there in timber factories. And they told me that years ago they had the same problem as in New Zealand. They had a huge amount of pine forest, or they call it ficta. I think it's a spruce type of product. It's very similar to pine. Huge amount of that, they weren't adding value to it. So there was no connection between the milling of logs and things to the home building, other than building with sticks on site. And they've created for themselves a leading design industry, and their timber timber construction companies have gone down into that vertically integrated and are now involved in the design and have partners with architects and things like that. And they said to me that that they were in a similar sort of situation as New Zealand, and it's been fantastic for them. So rather than bringing in houses from China and things like that, there's a possibility for us to do that with our pine in New Zealand and with our labour force in New Zealand. Might mean that there needs to be collaborative partnerships between people, so that your local builder who's used to be building outside on the site might be in a partnership with somebody who owns a machinery, for example, inside a factory. All those kinds of things I think needs to be worked through, because I'd hate to see in New Zealand only the big companies able to build, because I think that would be a real shame.
There's a lot of labour in a house. It's a huge component of making a house, and you can get the labour rate to be much reduced. You can then spend more time making it. So you could get quite a complex handcrafted building at a similar cost to a fairly cheap, quickly made house here. So it would come down to what you wanted to pay for, but if your labour rates are less, yeah, that's going to make a massive difference. And that's my concern, is a lot of people are pushing the idea of prefab, which I don't have an issue with, but I have a huge issue if they don't follow it through to its conclusion, which is houses not made in New Zealand. What that will do, though, is free up our builders to fix the buildings that are here. In Christchurch, there's an enormous amount of work for the building industry just to fix what's already there. And also builders to make bespoke houses that are one-off designs, site-specific, architecturally designed, and the things that do take, high skill sets and again, a lot of time, but people can pay for.